Good afternoon, and I'm reminded of what my mother once said about some English member of parliament who was called the dinner gong, because he went on opining while they were thinking of dining. So I do not wish to opine very long. One of the principles of advocacy which Justice Patnaik's fellow judge, Justice Kadju, would advise us was to be brief, to be bold, and to be gone. So, I think that one of the reasons that the Editors Guild of India and the Press Council has called me is my name. My name is Sanjay. And if you look at it, the very first journalist that we know was Sanjay. Sanjay was tasked and he was given the strength to look at a battlefield, decipher it for a blind king, and narrate it faithfully. In Mr. Ram's words, he had a credible informational function. He also had a critical function where he told Dhritarashtra that, look, here you have gone wrong. When Dhritarashtra at one point of time had exiled Vidur, it was Sanjay who was sent to get Vidur back. And he also had, at the end of the war, the task of setting a virtuous agenda. He was called by Yudhishthira and told to help in the task of reconstruction. And he stays on with the kingdom right to the end, where Dhritarashtra and the others walk over into the forest. He accompanied them. He saw to it that they died in a forest fire, reported it, and then went into the Himalayas. So Sanjay, as a journalist, is probably a very high standard, and that is why possibly, despite my name, and despite like Justice Patnaik, I too wanted to be a journalist. And I was told that, look, the pay is not very good and you are the first of 5 children. So it's better that you find something else. And I ended up through a possible career in the civil services, where I was supposed to be in the Indian Information Services. I avoided that and I ended up as a lawyer, where I met a former Minister of Information and Broadcasting, Arun Jaitley, who when he heard that I could have been in the Information Services, he said, yes. Oh, our paths would have still crossed. I said, yes, our paths would have crossed because my file would have been on your table for suspension. So I am very glad to be here to look at the task and at the scenario that now exists and do my own little bit of Sanjaying. And I'm not calling you Dhritarashtra, but I am trying to tell you exactly where your path of duty lies, like in the Bhagavad Gita, because other than Krishna and Arjuna, the first person who hears the Bhagavad Gita is Sanjay. Here, I would say that we today are in a post-truth world. The post-truth world is where the world has got accustomed to facts not really being facts. There's a word called truthiness. It sounds like the truth. You want it to be the truth, and therefore, it must be the truth. This is where the journalistic function of insisting on a critical function of checking what is the truth. Because somebody correctly defined journalism as saying that if somebody says it's raining and somebody says it's not, it is the journalist's job to open the window, check whether it is raining, and then report. It is not the journalist's job to say, okay, what would be more convenient? Would our sponsors, who are fertilizers companies, who want it to rain, should we then go by what they say and then say that there is rain when there is no rain? Or what would my editor like? The function of journalism is also to communicate, and to communicate without fear. We've heard much about freedom of speech and expression and the reasonable restrictions that have somehow eaten up that freedom. I often think that we as a society emphasize restrictions more than the freedom. We've often in our own households been told that, look, this is not the thing that you say at this point of time. We are as a nation used to the idea that of karmanye vadikaraste, in one sense, that we have a larger social function, and therefore as part of that larger thing, we therefore need to go only on the path of duty without looking at the fruits of that action. I think we would possibly be better served if we were to look at things and say what we see. बोल के लब आजाद है तेरे, बोल के जुबान अब तक तेरी है. That is what Faiz Ahmed Faiz from across the border wrote. And it is nothing less that your viewer, your reader expects from you. Speaking truth to power is not just simply a masthead. Justice Patnaik and Paranjay, I think, spoke about Indian Express during the emergency. The Indian Express during the emergency could take that line because Mr. Ramnath Goenka, who incidentally was a businessman with several other business interests, said that I came from Calcutta with a lota and I am quite content to go back with a lota. It was Catherine Graham of the Washington Post who, with all her wealth, was able to let the story of Watergate play out. It is while a businessman will be very tempted to use a media house to further his business interests, it is also up to the media house concerned to have its own set of critical values which would keep the businessman or keep the business interests under control. Now, in a post-truth world, where there is a price for paying the truth, as also people have said, one of the prices is often the threat that some little thanedar, some big minister, some big industrialist will take a dislike to you to the extent of possibly shutting you up. And we recently have a case which we were discussing with Mr. Ram, where a Hindu correspondent in Ahmedabad has been accused of being part of a GST racket, which his cousin has in a statement said that, look, this man was also helping us, giving us protection, etc. Now, the facts can play out. Investigation can go on. But a taxman, that's all a GST officer is, exercising police powers and keeping the man, a journalist, under detention. Shortly after a journalist writes stories about one important industry in the state of Gujarat, which is the diamond trade. Again raises questions. And it is there that collective action of the Editors Guild and others, press clubs like this, have to come into play. And my particular suggestion is that as far as all these legal problems go, and they are going to be continual, it is time that journalists think in terms of litigation protection. Please set aside specific dedicated funds, almost as an insurance policy, knowing that you may or your members may at some point or the other require access to protection. Now, many lawyers can give freely of their time, but as Napoleon famously said, an army marches on its stomach. There will be court fees, there will be typing, there will be cyclostyle, and a whole host of things. You can ask for a lawyer's time, but you may not be able to ask of a junior lawyer's time. This is where I would think that a dedicated fund to which on various occasions people can make contributions is the need of the hour. Justice Patnaik also spoke of how the magistracy has failed from time to time. But I somehow would beg to differ, because the magistracy today consists of many young, bright men and women who have opted, after a 5-year course, a well-researched legal education, to go into the magistracy. It is a magistrate who gave bail to Arvind Kejriwal when she had only a vacation assignment. And this was despite the superior courts having denied bail. I have also, during the CA NRC protests, there were times when we invoked the Chief Justice of India, but no particular effective orders were passed. The only order that was passed, which helped protesters at that point of time, was by a magistrate in Delhi. I have great hopes in the current generation of younger people who have gone into the judicial services, who come from a generation which has decided that we will not get into engineering colleges, but we'll go for law instead. And they have taken seriously their tasks of being custodians of the Constitution. But to reach those custodians, when you are in trouble, it still requires more than dedicated lawyers, more than committed magistrates. It also requires a knowledge of the process. And the last thing before I go, especially because there are senior journalists out here, please do not rush to the Supreme Court for everything. When people come to me saying, why don't we go to the Supreme Court? My first reaction often is the reaction is the first line of the Hippocratic Oath, which applies to doctors. The first thing you do, do no harm. Because once the Supreme Court says no, there is no other court which can say yes. There was the case of the Kerala journalist Siddiq Kappan, who all that he did was to share a cab to go and examine Hathras. And at that point of time, the administration was very insistent on shutting down any coverage. If he was arrested and had been produced before a magistrate at that point of time, or even any other court, in all probability he would have got bail. But what happened was, immediately there was an approach to the Supreme Court. It became a larger constitutional issue. They had to hear people at great length, and more importantly, the administration of the day then doubled down. Said, no, he is PFI, he is this, he is that, etc., etc., etc. So what would have taken before a magistrate's court, possibly a short hearing, extended to nearly two years or more of detention. So the courts, while they will grant relief, please know which is the appropriate court at which appropriate time. Now, we've gone through all the sections. Justice Patnaik has referred to them. But please be aware that the law is a consistently evolving field. And while there can be no separate protection for journalists, there can be processes put in which make journalism slightly safer. But the correct way to go is to ensure that whatever privileges or whatever safeguards are available to a journalist for free speech are also available to the common citizen. It is when the common citizen speaks up, exercises his right of free speech, that the journalist's power of amplification of free speech, the power of reach, comes into play. It's the freedom of speech as well as the freedom of reach, both of which need protection and will receive a certain measure of defense by the bar and protection by the bench. I thank you for giving me a patient hearing. I am most pleased to take any questions that you may specifically have. Thank you.